I would like to welcome you to our first event of the Impact Scholar community. And I'm extremely excited to host this event today. So I'm Sylvia Grevach, and I'm hosting this together with Garima and with Nicolas today. And also we have a great panel that we are welcoming today. It's Tima, Bansal, and Andy Hoffman. And we're going to talk a little bit about this in a few seconds. So if you want to tweet about this event, please use @ResearchImpact or #ResearchImpact. And you can also find more information online. So just a little bit about ourselves. So I am Sylvia Grevach. I'm an assistant professor at Brock University, and I work at the intersection of strategy, sustainability, innovation, and systems thinking. And my two co-hosts are Nicolas and Garima. Nicolas, he is a postdoctoral fellow at the Europe Institute at the University of Michigan. And if you follow Nicolas on Twitter or his weekly blog post, you actually notice that he's very passionate about talking about the relevance of research, and he also actually doesn't hesitate to hold back to ask any critical questions. And then we have Garima. Garima, she's an assistant professor at the University of Mexico, and she's actually a great role model on so many ends. And I actually find it really hard to introduce Garima because you're just truly amazing. And Garima, you work at the Research Practice Gap, and you're very engaged when it comes to talking about impact creation, and it's kind of truly remarkable. So I'm very excited to welcome you to today's event. And both Nicolas and Garima, they're going to talk a little bit about themselves as well in a few minutes, just a very short introduction. So before we start with today's event, we have a little bit of housekeeping. So this is kind of a technical slide because we are a lot of people on this call today. So I cannot see the number right now, but the last number I had was 70 people, which is quite a lot. And so we had to reinforce a little bit of rules for today's talk. So first of all, we muted all participants. So apart from a few co-hosts of this event, all the other participants are kind of muted. You cannot unmute yourself. So just to avoid some background noise. I would also like to encourage you to turn off your video. It's not that we're kind of unpolite or we don't want to see your faces. It's more kind of to reduce the bandwidth of the call. So if you want, feel free to turn off the video. And also, if you have any questions, we already started the discussion on the chat. So please use the chat function for all your questions and comments to the speakers or to us, or if you have any kind of food for thoughts for us, please feel free to use the chat box. We are kind of going to monitor it and also weave in your comments along the way. And we're also going to share the chat afterwards. And this kind of also leads me to the next point. Actually, we are going to record this event kind of for internal learning purposes and also to provide a summary for you afterwards. So please be aware that we're kind of recording it. And lastly, in the very unlikely event of Zoom bombing, which we all hope won't happen, so we decided to kind of shut down the call, and we will send you further information how we're going to proceed via email. All right, so and this is about technical background. The agenda for today is kind of twofold. We have a short introduction about the Impact Scholar community, also what we think our goals and our visions are for the community, and we're also going to talk a little bit about ourselves. This will take around 10-15 minutes, and then we have, I would say, the best part of today's event. It's our great panel, Tima and Andy, who are going to join us. The panel is a facilitated panel discussion. We have divided it into a few parts. Garima will facilitate the discussion. She will also introduce you to the different parts and how we're kind of organizing the panel discussion once we started. It takes around 50 minutes. And once we are done with the guest speaker or the panel discussion, we would like to share back our insights that we received from your signups. So if you remember, when you sign up for today's event, we actually ask you the question, what is impact for you? And also, what would you like us to work on? So that is part of our data insights. Nicolas is going to talk about it, what we have seen, and it will take around 10-15 minutes. And then towards the event, I will come back with a few takeaways and also with kind of our future plans for this community, and that will take around 5-10 minutes. So let's start with a little bit of an introduction about the Impact Scholar community. So actually the Impact Scholar community was kind of founded at the end of last year in 2019. And it was actually me and two colleagues from the O&E Greenings team. It's actually Simon Peck and Valentina DeMarchi, who are also on this call today. We had the idea for the Impact Scholar community based on our several engagements at the Academy of Management and the annual meetings. And we could see that there's an increasing appetite for early career scholars to really talk about research impact and to talk about the relevance of their work. So for instance, last year, the O&E Doctoral Consortium had a great panel on research impact. Also the Junior Faculty Consortium at the SIM and the O&E division had a great discussion, and we really felt kind of that there's more to it than just talking to it once a year. So we wanted to create a platform where early career scholars can kind of talk about it on a more continuous way and a more structured approach. So we founded this event. We also got some money from the Academy of Management. And once we had the money, I reached out to Nicolas at Garima, and over the last 4 months, so to speak, we decided, or we kind of shaped more the vision for this event. And we would like to share our vision and our goals with you now. So first of all, where we see this community going is we want to kind of foster a dialogue among junior scholars. We not just kind of want to talk about problems that we experience with research impact. We also want to talk about solutions, right? And rather than kind of silently joining those calls, we actually want to create active sessions when we meet on a more regular basis. And it's less about kind of giving presentations. It should be more about actions that we are taking together. So today might deviate a little bit from that goal because it's our first event. We're going to introduce ourselves, but for future events, we will be more interactive. Second, we also want to help our members to develop what we call impact capabilities, because creating research impact does not fall from the sky. It's kind of a certain skill set we need to develop. And we really want to help you to develop this skill set, and we want to give you concrete advices and build resources for you to look them up. We also want to take collective actions together. So what we think it's very important that we all take on responsibility, that we talk together, and that we also show together that talking about research impact and working on it is not something you need to wait until you have tenure, right? So you can start thinking about it really early on, and we want to show that this can be done with a community like this. And lastly, we also want to kind of encourage you to share your stories, because being an impact scholar can have so many different shades. There's not just one way or the other one. We will also see today Tima and Andy, who are great pioneers in talking about research impact, but might slightly differ also in their opinions. So we want to feature different stories and different examples. And we also want to create kind of a intergenerational discussion, so to speak, though this community is mainly for early career scholars made by early career scholars. We also want to talk with senior scholars. We want to learn from you. We want to hear your advices, and we want to just share our experience and our knowledge across different generations. So this is basically our ambition, our goal for this community. And we really hope that this also resonates with you. So now let's move on to kind of talking a little bit about Nicolas and Garima and me, and how we kind of experienced impact or along our way, because as I said, we also want to kind of share stories and examples, and it can have different shades. So we actually thought about creating a little activity and exercise where we show kind of how in a photo what research impact means for us and how we have experienced. So let's start with my photo. So you can see me, I'm in the right lower corner, and this is together with the Mars Solutions Lab in Toronto. It was in May 2019, so almost a year ago. And you can see this is not the usual office space. It was actually at a social event. It was an exploring event that we did all together after work. And a little bit about the story and what I did together with that team. Actually, it started when I was a postdoc together with Tima. So Tima approached me actually to do a 5-month ethnography with the Mars Solutions Lab in Toronto. And I have to say, I was actually not excited. Tima might remember this very well. I was in the last year of my postdoc. I said, Tima, we already have so many research work collected. I'm really not interested in collecting more data. I want to sit down, analyze my old data, and I just want to write papers. And we had so many lengthy discussions, but Tima kept saying, Sylvia, that is a great opportunity. And she was so excited, and she said, okay, that's the very unique time you can study systems thinking in action. And I didn't think so at all, to be honest. And I started the whole ethnography with a lot of reluctance. And I started my fieldwork, and I remember very, very well that the first weeks were a complete disaster. And Tima might remember that as well. I was just sitting there. I was thinking, oh my gosh, what am I doing here? And I felt so disconnected from the team, even though I felt that we are both wanted to work on sustainability and systems aspect. I felt we talk completely different languages, and we are approaching it in a very, very different way. And I literally felt what research practice gap actually physically means, because I really could feel it on myself that I was stressed about the whole situation. And after a few weeks, I kind of decided, okay, I need to change something here. I cannot just sit there and observe everyone. I need to engage with them if I really want to understand how systems thinkers are working and how they work on large, complex social problems. I had to kind of take off my hat as a researcher, and it was a participant observation. And I decided, instead of focusing too much on the observation part, I should be a participant more, and I should really share with them our knowledge, and I help them with their project work, with interviews, with writing reports. And then all of a sudden, everything changed. So we kind of started to interact differently. We shared our knowledge and our experience. And as you can see on the photo, towards the end of the whole ethnography, I kind of emerged very well. So you don't see the disconnection any longer. I felt like a part of the team. And actually, I got a card afterwards that I still have on my desk, and everyone wrote very, very nice notes on it. And the one that stuck with me most, that actually said, Sylvia, you have been the puzzle piece we have been always missing in our work. And that really kind of changed. It opened up my eyes, and I could really feel how important it is, even for early scholars, to talk about impact and to reach out to practitioners and to help them to reach a goal together. So that's my impact story. Now I'm handing over to Nicolaus and Garima, and I will come back to you towards the end of our event.
I was going to say good morning, but I see we have people from Dubai where it's 6 p.m. and India where it's 8:10 p.m. So good morning and good evening. And I think we need a new greeting. So I'm just going to say good internet, everyone. Good internet. I hope everyone's doing well. I'm going to share a small story about how I became interested in doing impact research, or research with greater impact. I was a park ranger at Yellowstone National Park before I started my PhD program. I was an education ranger, and this is a picture of me talking to a group of people about a steam vent. And the Park Service has a mission of both preserving special places like Yellowstone, but also providing opportunities for recreation. And that is often in tension. And I learned quite a bit in that job about how an organization struggles to balance that tension between preservation of an ecological system and use of that system. And I would go home from work and I would start reading academic journal articles in the evenings. And I decided, well, if I'm really this interested in understanding the research perspective on how organizations relate to the natural environment, then maybe I should actually go and do that. So I started a PhD program in strategy in a business school, trying to understand what an organization looks like that is truly sustainable. That's kind of my area of work. And I've been trying to connect my research to answering that question ever since. And I'm just very excited that we have a community of people that's now, we're at 137 participants on this call, and that's very exciting. So thank you all for joining us today. It's great to have you here. And I'll now pass it on to Garima for her story.
Thank you so much, Nicholas. And thank you, Sylvia, for such a warm and beautiful introduction. So I'll be quick. So this picture is from my fieldwork in India. This was a time I was still collecting data for my dissertation. And sort of I'm speaking with these farmers struggling with, barren lands and sort of at the same time really trying to balance the power dynamics with a paper company that's, imposing upon them. And so as many of you who sort of do field work with disadvantaged population may resonate with is that, whenever you go into the field as a researcher, not only the impact is front and center for you, but the people who you're studying actually ask you how you can help them, So I received many, many, many such questions. Okay, all this is fine, interviews and focus groups and whatnot. How can you help us? And I really didn't have an answer, just this deep frustration that I didn't know how. And so that was the time I joined my postdoctoral fellowship at Ivy, and I worked with Tima, and I got involved in Network for Business Sustainability, or NBS. And spoiler alert, Tima will probably talk about NBS, so I'm not going to go too much into it. But all I'll say is that it was just so freeing and so liberating to be able to own up and say, I care about impact, and I want my research to make a difference, and actually also get some guidance and skill building around impact. So it was great. So I very, very much look forward to learning from all of you. We have such a great diversity in this community right now on our call and otherwise, and we've been receiving just such amazing messages, people raising their hands and saying, this is what I want to do, this is how I want to contribute to this community. So we're so grateful for all that energy and all that excitement. And I'm sure Sylvia will talk at the end on how we can sort of channelize and continue with the momentum. So that's my story, which is also a great segue, I think, to bringing Andy and Tima in. So I'm just so thrilled that both of them have sort of decided to join us today for this kickoff event. And neither of them really need an introduction. Both have inspired me, and I'm sure there are many, many on the call that you've sort of been inspired by them to use your voice and sort of use your position as an academic for making real change. And as Sylvia alluded in the beginning, what I really love about having both of them together here is that they have really crafted their unique ways toward impact. So I've seen Tima closely, worked with her, and she has this amazing insight and intuition to design research practice collaborations that take us toward impact. And I've seen Andy really use his research insights to participate in public discourse and use his voice for making change. So both very different pathways, but also just the great diversity to move toward impact. So here's how we're going to use our time. In a bit, I'm going to invite Tima and Andy to share a couple of opening remarks. Maybe if possible, you can also share your inputs on where we can take this community. That would be great. And then Nicola, Sylvia, and I came up with a bunch of topics on which we actually think that Tima and Andy differ a little bit. So we're going to bring those topics into the conversation and, encourage them to have a dialogue around those topics. Most importantly, as you hear them talk for the next couple of minutes, please input your questions in the chat function, because that's the only way we can make this interactive. So when it is time for Q&A, Nicholas is monitoring the chat. So I'm going to call on him to share your questions. So without further delay, Tima, do you want to start and share a few remarks?
Well, first of all, I want to thank the organizers, Garima, Sylvia, and Nicholas, for inviting me. And I just want to note, it's hard not to note this, but the three of them are all postdocs, former postdocs. I think Nicholas is still a postdoc. And then they all are qualitative researchers. And I think that somehow plays into this impact story. And of course, Grima and Sylvia were my former students. So talking about impact, I hope that that's partly how I had my impact. The other thing I want to say is that the range of this community across the world is stunning, all the way from South Africa, Australia, India, China, to North America and Europe, of course. And so I'm just overwhelmed by the interest. I wanted to cover 3 areas. One is I'll tell you a little bit about my journey, then maybe tell you where I think I have had impact or have tried to have impact, and then some of the things that I've learned. I'll try to do this relatively quickly. And I think that people relate to stories. And so as much as I don't want this to be about me, if you know at least where I come from, you probably know why I've ended up where I am now. So I did my doctoral work at the University of Oxford in the early 1990s, and it was in the natural environment. And at that time, the WCED had just come through with its report in 1987, so it's only a few years afterwards. And this is prior to Said Business School, so there was really very little institutional support. So those of you who've done PhDs at schools where you didn't really even have supervision or coursework, it's a very, very independent process. My topic, what I had done was talk to managers and say, what do you want to have research? And that was what became eventually my 2000 AMJ, which is why companies would be environmentally responsible. But it did make me think about impact and qualitative work and being engaged with the community and being very, very practical. But then I wanted, for personal reasons, to move to North America. And I moved into Georgia State University, and that was a huge paradigm shift. And so those of you who relate to the North American approach, at that time, which was by then the mid-1990s, I moved to a school that only valued quantitative research and that had very clear journals that I had to aspire to. And so it's quite the shift from this engaged type work to quantitative work. So I spent the next several years tooling up on being able to publish in the better journals with quantitative work. And I think my first article took me 5 or 7 years to publish. It was an SMJ quantitative piece. And I loved the findings. I thought the findings were really important. And they showed that firms that worked, had environmental practices and communications were to experience less financial unsystematic risk. But I had no one to tell. I had the 12 people that might have cited my work, and I don't know if you relate to this, but at that time, there's no venue for publishing. So I, at that point, moved to the Ivy Business School, which is in Canada, and there's a little bit more support. And I formed I got some grant money that started the Network for Business Sustainability. And that goal was just to bridge the two communities so that people in research could have impact on practice. But I knew I had to go full circle to say even that the research that we do is not always the right research. And so the the practice community has to have impact on us. And so it changes the way what we research and how we research. And so I wanted this to be circular, that we impacted them, they impacted us, and we got closer together in that process. And so that sort of tells you at least my evolution. Let me tell you then a little bit where I think my impact has been. And then I'll tell you some of my learnings from that. One is institutional. So clearly, forming the Network for Business Sustainability 15 years ago, it's hard to believe, was my way of building an institution that would create that impact. So like I said, and we do work like translations. So we translate research for practice. We get the managerial community inform what we do. We did the systematic reviews. We had a leadership council of diverse organizations that represent different sectors in Canada that would say, this is the research that we want. We published that for 10 years, the top research priorities. So NBS is still going strong, and I think that it is a place, it's one of the few in the academic community in sustainability where we can actually reach managers. And we have over 8,000 people that respond to that subscribe to our newsletter, but then there's all the social media impact that we have as well. The second one is through the Innovation Learning Lab. And Grima and Sylvia have been involved with that, but I believe in engaged scholarship, and it has to be in a way that provides value to the community. And I think that the frontier in sustainability is in this opportunity space. So we've assembled about 20 organizations in Canada, again, because this is my pond. And we get together quarterly to talk about how we can understand the innovation process in a way that would understand the systems, not sustainability necessarily, but the systems in which we operate. And so I feel like we're offering them something about through some of the top research in this area, and they're offering us something by saying this is how they think about innovation. And we've gotten senior executives at the table, so all the innovation officers and some sustainability officers as well. So I still am involved in engaged scholarship. The third way, so it's NBS, the Innovation Learning Lab, is through the Academy. I sincerely believe that academic research is important. And yet it's not always as relevant as it can be. And we're not always open to issues around the type of engaged scholarship that we should be doing. We don't have, we didn't, at least when I started thinking about the Academy, we didn't have as much qualitative work, engaged scholarship, and sustainability work. So I was an associate editor at the Academy of Management Journal for 3 years, and then more recently just stepped down from 3 years as a deputy editor. And that's, it's heavy workload at AMJ, but I think it was really important to say that it validates the type of work that we do. So we'll be really aiming to help to work with in the Academy to welcome the type of research that I think will bridge that research practice gap. And finally, at my business school, I've run the center at the business school, at the Ivy Business School for a few years, 15 years. And I hope that'll influence my peers and make sustainability legitimate within the teaching environment. And so that we now have sustainability as a core course in all of our programs. And so I'm so proud of that we've moved that needle. And it's, it's like Sisyphus. I keep pushing the ball uphill, and then they change program directors and the ball slips back down, and I keep pushing it up. But I do think that that's important. I want to end then with some things that I've learned. One, it's hard. It's harder than I ever thought it would be. 15 years on, I can't honestly hold my head up high and say, I have had impact. I don't know where I've had impact. But the fact that we have 139 people on this call means at least people care. So it's becoming more legitimate than when we first started. But boy, you have to persist. Second, I think that we cannot lose what's unique to us. I'm very proud of being an academic. I think we have a different voice. I think we have something more to offer than the practice community has. And so the two worlds are different. They're both important, but we have to always come from a place that recognizes who we are and not become a manager. We don't want to act like them, but we need to be able to speak to them. But our unique insights is what's going to change the world into a better place. The third thing is that impact has to be two ways. It can't be just us talking to managers or talking to others. We have to hear. And I think only when we hear can we reach them. So it's a two-way process. Another point is that it's different at different career stages. I am thinking about impact actually in a very different way now, and I am ready to pivot. I think that what I've done in the past isn't necessarily what I need to do now, because I can take risks that maybe I couldn't in my earlier years. But in your earlier years, my earlier years, I had to think about the questions I asked, the type of research I had. I had to be very purposeful in publishing in the journals that mattered. And lastly, I think that it's really important. What we do is going to be impact this research practice bridge. It's not just because I want to have a bigger audience. The only thing that motivates me, quite frankly, right now is to solve some of the big problems that we have in the world. We'll never solve them on our own. And we need people of different points of view. We need people to get together and have conversations that challenge each other. We think long-term, we think in abstract ideas, we see patterns, we have time. Managers don't, but they have action. They have this prototyping ability to know what works and what doesn't work. It's bringing us together that will solve these big problems. So ultimately, we have to be part of that conversation. That's it for me. So Garima, on to you again.
Thank you so much, Tima. That was fantastic. I feel like every time, this is what, year 7, I know you, but every time I learn something new. So thank you so much for that wonderful opening remarks. Andy, all yours.
Okay, well, thank you. And thanks, Tima. It's fun to do this with you. Tima and I came up together, getting our PhDs in the early 90s when the field of environmental management didn't exist. So we sort of busted through that, and I see a parallel here of engaging the question about how do we change the norms of academia where engagement is more valued and more respected. And so I want to talk about the importance of what this community is, what it says about the future of academia, because it has to change. And I would begin by asking every one of you on this call, why did you choose to become an academic? Whether you're a professor now or a doctoral student or a senior professor, why did you choose to do this? And I am willing to bet it was not to get the highest H-index you could and the most citations. I'm willing to bet that for most, if not all of you, in fact, the fact that you're on here, I think there's probably a self-selection, you wanted to have an impact in the real world. You wanted to make a difference with your work. And I think there's some really good questions being asked right now about what are the many ways we can do that, because the number of ways we can do that are expanding. And the need for it is growing, the urgency of us to do it. And the COVID crisis right now raises some serious questions about what we do. So I want to talk about why are we here and what does it portend for the future of the career, the role of the academic scholar in society. I want to focus largely on 2 areas. One, are we getting our research out into the real world? Are people reading our work? And I'm sorry to say, I think the answer is largely no. If you just look at the extent to which people diminish the value of scientific research within our society, the quality, the poor quality of public and political discourse. And I also have to put a caveat in here. I'm going to come at this from an American, North American point of view, which is a bit extreme at the moment. But that's where I sit. That's the world I'm in. So that will be my focus. The RAND Corporation, if you're familiar with RAND, they are basically a Defense Department think tank, and they did a report. It's called Truth Decay. And it's really interesting reading on what has happened to public discourse in this country. And they come to a number of conclusions. I heard Michael Rich speak on this at the National Academies. Number 1, we're debating facts. We're debating facts. 2, we blur facts and opinion. And that's important. Whenever you start to see news, there is a blurring. It's an editorial, but it's also giving news. It's not telling you what it is, but also how to think about it. And number 3, we're distrusting previously trusted sources of information, otherwise known as us. The university, the academy, is not as respected as it once was in our society. And that is a problem. The report concludes by saying this is the existential crisis of our time. We can solve nothing else if we don't come to a common understanding of facts, data, information. How can you address climate change if you won't even agree it's happening? And so this is the challenge, and to my mind, it places the gauntlet right at the door of academia. Because if we don't step forward and provide trusted information to public and political discourse, who will? And that really starts to put a spotlight on us of what are we doing. Now, why is this happening? There's a number of reasons. One, the general public, they don't even not just understand the conclusions of science, they don't understand what science does. They don't understand the scientific method. And so there has to be an outreach effort, a communication effort to explain to people, this is what we do, this is how we do it, this is what it can tell you. There is out there active distortion of science. There's a lot of pseudoscience going on, a lot of politically inspired research. I don't know about you, but I get invitations to be editor-in-chief of medical journals, engineering journals. And some of it is obviously a joke, not serious research, but some of it's very hard to tell. If you want to see how silly it has become, you can look this up. Someone published a paper in a journal. All you have to do is pay money and you can publish it. And excuse the language for a second, but you can look it up. It's called Take Me Off Your Fucking Mailing List. And they published a paper. And it's that sentence over and over again. They even put a chart in it. Take, arrow, me, arrow off. And you can publish this kind of stuff. Now, we obviously look at that and say that's a joke, but a lot of research out there, you can't tell. Social media has certainly changed the quality of public discourse. People don't need to come to scientists to get their information. Just ask any medical doctor what it's like to give a diagnosis and the patient saying, yeah, but I read on WebMD that I actually should do something totally different. And that is our world. There's public antagonism towards science right now. Scientists are seen as lefties, liberals, godless, coldly rational, and people are dismissive of academics. So we have a problem in the extent to which our work is getting out into the general public. I would add a caveat, you know, not only are other people reading our work, are we reading our own? And that is a fair question. There are roughly 2 million research articles that were published last year in 28,000 journals. We are awash in journals, but are we reading them ourselves? The average academic paper was cited only 10.8 times between 2000 and 2010. If you carve out the social sciences, that drops to 4.67. 82% of humanities articles were never cited. 32% of social science articles were never cited. 27% of the natural sciences, 12% in medicine. And you can get tenure for this. And so there's a fair question, who are we speaking to? And are they listening? In this COVID crisis, I think there's going to be a reckoning of people saying, okay, what are you doing? And why are you getting all that money for doing it? Particularly those of us in business schools. Wharton did a study. They calculated the average cost of an A-level management publication. Their answer was $400,000. Now, if the purpose of that publication is a line on your resume to get a great job at a great university, people do have a right to ask, what are you doing? And if you don't think they're asking that, look again. There was a survey 2 years ago of registered Republican voters. 58% thought that universities had a net negative influence on society. And that's the world in which we live. And if we stay within our ivory towers, talking to our little narrow academic communities, then we are going to have a problem. And so I think there's a serious urgency for us to start to shift the norms of academia. And I like Jane Lubchenco, when she was head of the AAAS, she had her speech as science's social contract. They have an obligation and responsibility to serve society with our research. And I think that we need to re-engage with that science contract to communicate to the public the value we provide. I agree with Tima that we have something to say. I don't think we're saying it very well. And I think we need to start to bring it out. So some quick things before we kick us off. I think there are some questions as we start to embark on this new frontier. I'm excited. I think the new generation of scholars are coming in, the younger folks. They do want to have impact in a stronger way than some of the older folks. I came up in a world that if a doctoral student announced they didn't want to go into academia, there's a good chance your committee members would quit. I think that day is changing. But I see more and more young people, such as those that organize this wonderful event, who are going to take matters into their own hands and try and drive change in academia. Now, there are some questions that need to be asked and answered. One, what is public engagement? What does it mean? What are the varied domains in which we can do this? They are expanding every day. Does everything count as a public engagement? That's a really difficult question to answer. And what is our role within public discourse? Roger Pielke has a very provocative book called The Honest Broker, bringing that question out. Two, how should we engage? And Tima started to talk about that, about a two-way street, not getting beyond the knowledge deficit model. Number three, what are the obstacles to overcome? Certainly the tenure and review process, but also the informal culture is against the idea of engagement. What to expect from engagement? It's messy. It can be hostile. I have a folder for hate mail that I get because I write about climate change, but then also what is changing. And there's a lot of activity trying to change the rules of academia, and that gives me hope. And so I'm going to stop there. I'm trying to just cue it up, and then I'll let the moderators take us wherever we need to go.
Thank you so much, Andy. And I love the call to action and all the provocative questions you've sort of left us with. And, you know, hopefully we'll get to them over the course of time as this community evolves. So just in terms of, I've been monitoring the chat, and there's just some amazing questions there. So I'm just going to suggest that we go straight to Q&A, so that, you know, we can really bring people's questions and perspectives in. So Nicholas, are you ready to read out a few of them for us? Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, first, thank you, Tima and Andy, for your comments and the discussion so far. We've got quite a few questions, and they're still coming in, so please keep adding your questions to the chat. And Garima, maybe you can start looking at the chat a bit more to kind of get the questions and make sure we don't miss any. I'm going to try to get to as many as we can. So one of the early questions was from Kurta Mishra, and it's kind of focused, it's directly asking Tima, but I think both Andy and Tima can comment. How did Tima keep herself motivated and driven when she moved to North America and there was pressure to publish in a narrow range of journals? As an early career researcher, I'm struggling with this. So Tima, maybe you could give some comments about how you managed that.
The tenure hurdle. It was as simple as that. To keep our jobs, we have to publish in the top journals, and I hadn't been trained to publish in the top journals. And so, yeah, it's, I just want to add one thing. It's really important for us to learn the skills, academic skills. And so, as I said earlier, I believe very much in the academy and what we do. I think that the training that we get gives us a different perspective than others have. So to learn to publish in the top journals is important. So continuing with that no matter what. And then I don't believe that has to be separate from impact, but it can impact, sorry, the skills are important to have the impact.
And I'll just offer a quick comment. I've had no pressure to publish in 8 journals. Heavy sarcasm there. You know, I like the analogy, if you want to become a great piano player, you're going to have to learn your scales. And when you have developed the mastery of the scales and be able to play, then you can go in any number of directions. You can be a jazz pianist, you can be a classical pianist, whatever you want, but you need to learn the scales. And so the A journals, the academic journals, I do have a problem with the idea of A or B. I think they're different modes for different audiences, and I don't like the hierarchy notion of that. But you know, once you start to develop the skill, then you can start to develop yourself as the full scholar and bring your individuality into that as your career advances. And that's the key. I see a lot of scholars that as they advance in their career, they stay in the same mode and don't improvise and don't define the role for themselves. And I think that is unfortunate, because I think that one of the beauties of becoming particularly a full professor is you can do anything you want. And I'm not saying check out and write poetry, but I'm saying speak to the audiences that matter to you. I would also add a caveat. If you decide to shelve that desire until you get tenure full, that's crazy too, because it will die in you. So you meter it in slowly. Do the hard work. I've often described academic publishing like it's like cod liver oil. It tastes really bad, but it makes me healthy and allows me to have the position I have right now. So you got to do what you got to do. And then when you get the power, do what you want to do. And I would also add, take some responsibility for managing the institution of which we're a part. That's what senior professors are supposed to do, in my mind, is to start to take the role to try and change the institutions so that it become better and stronger and healthier.
So both of you have talked a little bit, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly, about the stages of the career and this idea that there are skills that are more relevant for some stages than others. So because we're talking mostly about early career researchers, what are some of the specific skills that you think early career researchers need to develop to successfully transition to the next stage? And are those skills related to impact? Because I feel like people are often told, wait to have impact until you have tenure. And I think that is sometimes discouraging. So what are some specific skills that you think are most relevant to the early career researchers wanting to have impact to also stay successful in the career track?
Do you want to go first, Andy?
Oh, I thought you said you'll go first. Sorry. Well, I mean, you know, getting back to the earlier question, learn the craft. You got to do that. The first step in having a sustainable career is still having a career, and the rules are what they are. We have an apprentice model. They're not going to change in the short term. So recognize the world for what it is, but I believe it is changing. And if you're not going to learn the skills of engagement, teach yourself. Here at the University of Michigan, we have a program called RELATE. It stands for Researchers Expanding Lay Audience Teaching and Engagement. It's an awful acronym, but it was created by a bunch of doctoral students and postdocs that said, if you're not going to teach us, and let's face it, a lot of the senior scholars don't know how to do this, we're going to teach ourselves. Okay, master social media. If you haven't looked to see if yourname.com, if that web page is available, buy it, grab it. If you're not on Twitter, get on. Learn how social media works. Learn how the sorting tools work. How does DOI work? ORCID, Impact Scholar, Altmetric. How does Google Scholar do its sweep? These are the tools that make your career work. Learn how to talk to journalists. Learn how to talk to business people. Learn how to talk to government officials. Again, these will be increasing the skills of engagement. And if you can't find places in your university that's going to teach you how to do it, learn how to do it yourself, create a community, make it happen, groups like this.
I couldn't agree with Andy more. So instead of repeating, let me just add on to what he said. As I said earlier, the three organizers, Grima, Nicholas, and Sylvia, are qualitative researchers. Don't underestimate the impact that qualitative research has on the community. So when you're collecting data, as Sylvia told in her story about the Mars Solutions Lab, that they thought that she was an important part of the puzzle, she changed them while she was also being changed. So sometimes that direct impact in the data collection can matter. But then also, when you're doing the research, especially in the early days, picking a question that makes a difference, a question that, if it's quantitative research, that the community of practice wants to know the answer to, will be huge in that. And so, you know, one of the pieces I did with Caroline Flammer was looking at short-termism and long-term incentive executive compensation plans. The piece ended up in the Wall Street Journal. I'll tell you, it's not because I think the quality of the research was fine, but it was because of the questions that we answered. So ultimately, if you pick a good question, the quantitative research will be published, and the empirical results of what we do are important. It can change conversations. So in addition to all the social media that you can be doing and the public discourse, there's also the research that you do can have impact in itself.
So is this advice the same for the North American context as the European context? There's a question about whether there's a difference in those contexts in terms of these kinds of skills for early career researchers.
And I'll also just add to sort of what Nicholas is asking is that, you know, there's some sort of reactions on the chat saying, wouldn't that perpetuate the system? You know, so if you're saying wait until tenure, you're saying wait until tenure, wouldn't that perpetuate the system that, you know, you can't have impact until you get to tenure, which I think both of you have answered in some ways, but I just also want to put that out there.
Yeah.
Did you want to go, Andy? Or?
Sure. I hope I didn't come across as saying wait until you get tenure. What I did say was meter your development, cultivate it slowly. You know, like if you were coming straight out on the market and you had a resume that had 20 blogs and 1 paper in development, I think you'd have a serious problem on the market. Recognize the world for what it is and then work within it. And so does it perpetuate the system? I might flop the question and say, do you have the power right now to change it? I don't think you do. But I do think that there are pressures to change it. and keep attentive to those. Develop yourself, you know, as Wayne Gretzky said, go where the puck is going to be, not where it is. And I do think the trajectory of the academy is moving more towards having impact. But I would also say, if you are not grounding that in the legitimacy of having a solid research portfolio that you know how to do your craft, then you're editorialing. And you really want to come from an area of expertise and legitimacy that comes from being within the academy. And so, but don't bury it. Grow it, cultivate it. If you bury it and think you're going to resurrect it in 15 years, it's going to be dead. It's not going to happen. Tima?
So speaking directly to the question of North American versus European, because I had the European experience at the beginning and then moved to North America, and I feel like Canada now sits with a leg in each. I feel I didn't understand how significant the differences are between US schools and European schools until I had my journey and sat in Canada, I guess. But the European schools, and this I think applies across almost all non-US schools, there's much less of a gap between research and practice. And so researchers are actually respected somewhat in practice. And so what Andy has said about this earlier, that science isn't appreciated, there is something unique that's happening in the US right now that is starting to bleed into other parts of the world. But the Europeans have this ability to be academics in practice and to integrate with practice a little bit more. In the US, there's something about, one, the skepticism of science, as well as the silos of each. And so US-based journals, and you know, one that I, of course, am intimately connected to, but AMJ, AMR, all of those journals, ASQ, Org Science, all based in the US, have a certain way of thinking that really is different from practice. And I think that we need to figure out a way to bridge those better than we do. And that's part of the, I guess that's part of my mission, is to try to figure out how the journals, the US-based journals, can be more accepting of work that's more engaged. And to wait until post-tenure, I think that it's hard. It's hard to do. It's hard for me to do social media at the same time that I do serious research. And I don't know how to balance the two. So I think that I'm very sympathetic if you're early in your career to do serious research while also trying to do social media. So my advice is just to do research that matters and then try to get some of the interim results out there, but really, really hard to do both. I do want to mention though, Nicholas, if it's all right, Jean mentioned, Jean Bartunek on the chat, something about Ed Shine's rant. And I would love to hear more about what she means, but anyway, I don't know if that's possible.
I can unmute Jean for, yeah, I think I should be able to. Jean, you should be able to share with, are you there?
Sure. Yeah. And I just, I stopped stopping my video, so that hopefully will help too. So I just want to mention that last week, Ed Shine sent me a note that he wanted me to distribute to a few people, and that I did, and there's been some lively conversation about it. And I sent it to Grima, but let me just summarize it. It's actually very short, it's only 2 pages, but it starts with something that I think is an important thing to remember, which is not just, gee, how can I get my stuff known and helpful to practitioners, but what questions are we asking that matter to have known? Yep. So he's saying, social scientists need to speak up. The next pandemic will be global warming and the collapse of pieces of the global environment. We already see early symptoms with the heat waves and so forth. That I don't want to say the whole thing, but can we take advantage of we observe globally as a positive impact of our staying home? This is going to force some shift from rampant competition between countries, states. We need to invent, we recognize we need to invent methods of collaboration on a global level, but those are going to be very different from what we often study as collaboration. which is a focus on the two teams get along with each other or not. And he says, can we show that with complex, messy, systemic, interconnected problems, collaboration is not only necessary, but actually produces new and better innovation adaptations. So then he started imagining next year's Davos conference, where we get the heads of a whole bunch of companies together. Please do share it. But I think that what he's saying is really important. It isn't just, gee, how can I have an impact whatever I'm doing? It's what is our role and responsibility as social scientists, which is a much bigger question than just how do I get somebody to pay attention to me. I mean, I agree 100%, as those of you who know me know, that is how we get connected is really important. But I think that this is a really valuable question. What can we contribute that we're the only ones who can contribute as social scientists? Or maybe not the only ones. And probably that contribution is only going to happen if we do it not just among our group of academics, but with other people who are involved in actually doing things in the world. Does that make sense?
Yes, that's fantastic, Jean. Thank you for sharing that.
If I could build on that, I mean, what Jean is bringing in, the questions we ask within our academic journals. A lot of people talk about the idea that we merely need to translate the work from the academic journals into the real world, and that is actually illogical. The product of an academic journal was designed for a particular purpose, typically theoretically driven. The idea that when it's done, it can suddenly be translated for a different purpose will be coincidental. So we have to change the questions that we're asking, and that's where Tima's work as an editor has tried to push that. That's where RRBM is trying to push that. The journals themselves have to change. And I think that if you think about the long history of the American business school model, and the difference between Europeans and Americans, I see a lot of European business schools trying to be American business schools. At the same time, where American business schools are starting to question their model, which I find very funny conflict. But if you look at the history, and I'll make it very brief, but the early business schools in the United States were not seen as rigorous. And around the 1950s, there was a study by the Ford Foundation that said it's not serious work. And that's when you had ASQ get formed. And that's when we adopted the social science model, more like psychology or sociology. And the pendulum swung really hard the other way towards theory. I think people are now saying that the pendulum went too far. And we have to bring it back to get a little more balance between theory and practice. That is hopeful for me. We're talking about a massive institutional shift. So my 2 cents.
Thank you so much. No, thanks to both of you. And thanks, Jean, for jumping in. And yeah, please send us the write-up and we'll circulate it amongst the participants.
Well, I already sent it to you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I think. So
No.
if it didn't come, just let me know, okay?
I'll follow up, yeah. Nicholas, do you have another? I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions.
Sure. So I think this question about how impact fits into the academic career progression is a major question of interest for this community. We got a lot of responses about that on the survey, so this won't be the last time we talk about that. But I want to shift a little bit to a question from Katarina Dittrich, and I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly, that is about engaging with practitioners. And the question is, would I engage with practitioners? I often feel a bit intimidated because they know their business much better than me. So how can I deal with the imposter syndrome that comes from this? And this, I think, is very relevant, especially for qualitative researchers, but also quantitative researchers who want to inform their work with practitioner input.
Tima, you want to go first?
Sure. I think that I'm very sympathetic to that point of view. So it's, and I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier, is that we have to hear in order to engage, and other people always know their work better than we would know their work. And Grima, I know, talks a lot about this, but if we stand on a platform and say that we're the experts, we have a certain voice that we give. We don't have to be the experts. We are, in some ways, the filter, the ability to reshape, ask questions. As in the asking of questions, I think, that we often have managers respond differently. So I do not, when I talk to executives, I cannot stand on a platform expertise, but what I do is start to ask the right questions that they start to see what they do differently. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I hope at least it's my perspective on it.
And I would add to that. I mean, certainly listening is an important skill that many academics don't possess. There's a joke here in Ann Arbor that many of the locals who are not part of the university are hesitant to invite academics to dinner because they don't want to get lectured at over dinner. We're very good at that. Nothing more off-putting at a dinner table when someone says, the literature says, which basically says, don't challenge me. But I would also add that we do have something that the business people want. Anytime you bring a business person into your classroom, watch, and what you'll see is they typically can tell war stories. What we do as academics is we create a model. We pull it all together and say, here's what it says in a more abstract, elevated level that can be applied to multiple different contexts. This is what we bring to the table, and they want that. So as much as you may feel imposter syndrome, they feel it as well because they have tremendous respect in business circles for the PhD, for the professor. And so bring what you have, don't be afraid of it. It is scary, you know, giving a talk to a business audience, they're gonna react in a different way than an academic audience will because you're telling them about how their world works. And they may have a problem with your telling them that, but hold your ground. And I think you might find that you will have a very interesting conversation that I would also add will make your next research question better. There's the beauty of engagement. I believe your research gets better.
Thank you. Nicholas, I'm going to ask a question that I saw come in, which I think is really great because it goes to sort of this institutional system that we have created. So, you know, most of us here are early career researchers. Some are on the job market. Some will go into the job market soon. And so, you know, the question is like, how can we really ask about changing the job market criteria in academia? So maybe that's a long-term goal of how to include impact as a key part of our work when these committees look at our, you know, job market package or look at us as a scholar. And maybe in the short term also, like how do you claim that identity of caring about impact when you're going into these circles where maybe it is not valued?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to go first, Andy?
Sure. Oh, yeah, okay. I keep missing her.
I got to ask the question.
The earlier point, the job market is what it is. You're not going to change it, but it is changing. I have a doctoral student who went on the market and the school asked for his Twitter handle because they wanted to see who was following him, and that was going to somehow register in their review process. I think that, you know, you still have to show that you know the basics. The market is what it is. But you don't have to hide your desire to have impact. What you have to show is it makes me a better scholar. It makes me a better member of your community. I can do what I need to do, but I can also take us to the next level of where is academia going. And so I do see change happening. And I don't think you necessarily have to hide it as much as when Tima and I came out as PhD students. I think the world is changing, but you still got to earn your bones. It's still an apprentice system.
Yeah, there is, I still feel like our field is schizophrenic though, don't you think, Andy, that there are some schools, especially the ones that consider themselves to be serious schools and serious academics, that if they see you having a large Twitter following, or they might say, well, you can't be a serious academic because you are writing to practice. And
it varies by discipline.
That's the place that we need to.
Yeah. Yeah, it varies by discipline. I think some are more resentful of that than others.
Mm-hmm. The other piece of it, though, is, and once again, I feel like we need to get into this world where we're bilingual, that we can speak with the same, or whatever, that's not the right word, but it's, I don't know how to even say the word, but polysemous.
Multilingual. You have to be multilingual.
Where you say one thing though, and it can speak to both communities.
Yeah.
In some ways, that's what I'd love us to be able to do. So we have a word, and the word is actually generated, or words or ideas are generated from academic the academic world, but have resonance in practice. And right now, I'm not sure we're there yet. But I know in my world, I see this in two ways, and I'm getting to the answer to the question finally, is in, when I was at AMJ, the papers that had the most resonance with reviewers were the ones that started with a practical problem and said, how is this possible that we have this issue and it hasn't been resolved? I'm going to use Alka Schussler's paper on melting summits that I edited. Now this is a little while ago. It did win the best paper award, but they started with, here we have the COP meetings years after years after years. How is it that the most important issue that we're facing has not received any kind of resolution? There's a practical question. It's a practical question for which we desperately need academics to weigh in on. And it was just fantastic the way that they framed it. How could it not have done well? How could the reviewers not have wanted to read it? That's one thing. Secondly, when I am sitting in an audience for a job candidate, I haven't applied for a job for a while, the candidates that resonate with me, recognizing that I'm biased a bit, but are the ones that can motivate the research that they do with that practical problem. So even if they haven't published in the best journals yet, if they can show me something that's important with really well-conducted research, I know it'll be published. So we don't need to speak two languages. We can bring those two languages together and have resonance in both communities.
And I would just like to add really quickly, what we're talking about here is institutional change. One school could come along and say, you know what, we're going to have a new set of rules for tenure, and practice is everything. You as a junior scholar would be crazy to follow that, because we live in an institutional world, and unless they're going to guarantee you tenure, you need a packet that's saleable out there in the world. So everything has to change together. And so think about it, we're at the beginning of the S-curve. And there's a little innovations going on. Here at Ross, we've added a fourth criteria to our standard research, teaching, and service. We've added practice. The Mayo Clinic has added social media to its tenure and review process. The journals are starting to change, although I think one of the big problems with the journals, the academic journals, is the time to publish. I see there's a special call for research on COVID-19. I'm sorry, but by the time those papers come out, are they going to still be useful? You know, when I talk to colleagues in engineering and I tell them, you could start a paper in the social sciences, it may come out maybe 4 years, and their jaw hits the floor. It's like, how are you possibly relevant? And the answer is, how do you stay relevant with those kind of turnarounds? But there are other channels. It's easier and easier to engage with the public, whether it's short form essays like The Conversation or The Monkey Cage, longer form essays like Behavioral Scientists. There are ways to get ideas out there much more quickly now. And I think we need to start to add those to our portfolio and not have this tunnel vision that, you know, if it's not on my school's A list, I'm not going to do it. That's anti-intellectual, and we need to change the academy. I also have to put the caveat, you know, the rules are what they are. So play within the rules and have small acts of deviance.
Thank you. That's great advice for now, for all of us, where we are in our careers. I also noticed Anne Sui. Anne is inputting some great suggestions and positive remarks about, you know, things changing. So, Anne, I'm going to try to unmute you, and if you want to quickly jump in and share some of those before I hand it back to Nicholas and Sylvia. Would you try speaking up, Anne?
Oh, sure. Thank you, Karina, very much. I was hoping that you can just read my comments. Let me start my video. Here we Oh, I don't know what happened. You know what happened? I'm going to take it off because I was fooling around with the background last night and I didn't know how to remove that awful picture. So anyway, what I was saying is jumping on what Andy is saying about the system being difficult to change. As junior scholars, you really have to work within the system. I respectfully disagree slightly, not total disagreement, for two reasons. One is that everyone has an opportunity to change the field by what you do personally. And I really believe in the power of the collective. Each one take one small step, collectively we can change we can make it a tsunami. So, and how junior authors can influence the system is by what you send to the journals. If all junior scholars send to the journals research problems that matters to society, that's all they can select from, right? As Tima said, now papers with practical problems are getting much more attention. And to that point, I also want to just to bring the news. Some of you probably already know that AMJ's new editorial has this wonderful call to authors. We want you to join the conversations in society. Now that's a very big phrase because we've been taught to join the conversations, but in the literature, okay? So the key word is society versus literature. So instead of looking to the literature for problems, now he's inviting authors to look to the society for problems. So there's a blank, open invitation to send manuscripts in on problems that matters to society. So that's one point. And second point I want to also bring is a bit of a, I think it's important news. The ASCSB as accreditation agency, that many of the schools care, not all of them, but many of them do, they has introduced a new standard and also revise some standards to encourage the schools to pay more attention to impact on society through its research and teaching programs. So this impact in society starts with standard 1, which is what's the mission of the school, in what area you're going to make a difference in society, locally or globally, and all the way to standard 9, which is the last one, as an overall capture what is the impact of your school has been in the last 5 years and looking forward. But the standard 9 is about past accomplishments, that the impact on society as a whole through your research and teaching programs. So young scholars who are working on, like this group, that you're going to be much needed asset for these schools because they're going to, they're going to look to have faculty who actually work on problems that they can use and they can be proud of that impact, in fact, is having impact on society. So in other words, the field is changing. And many schools are doing lots of things, like, like Michigan is one of the leaders, but there are many, many others that I know of. But we need to do a better job of letting the good news out, just like report the media only publish terrible news and none of the good news being shared. So at RBN, we have to do a better job of communicating to scholars everywhere about these changes that's happening. And we really have taken note that we try to do more of that from now on, not only forcing and try to encourage the system change, but more importantly, to let the world know what is changing and that to empower both junior scholars, senior scholars, and doctoral students about really following your passion of what you want to do, what impact you want to have, and know that the system is actually changing to free up the space and your opportunity to have a great impact. So that's all I want to share. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Anne. And I mean, I'm just going to end here by thanking all of you, Jean, Anne, Tima, Andy, to show us the diversity in, your opinion, perspective, and where the field is going. And it's just amazing to see what is possible. So thank you again, all of you. And I'm going to hand it back to Nicholas, who's going to spend a few minutes taking us through the data that we collected. Nicholas, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, thank you, Tima and Andy and everyone for the engaging discussion and Q&A. I'll now talk a little bit about some of the insights that we gleaned from the survey response data that you all provided when you signed up. So first I'll cover kind of some characteristics of the community that we're building. We didn't ask directly for location, but what we did was we looked at institutions that people listed, and Sylvia created this wonderful slide showing kind of where people are located. And as you can see, we have quite a global audience, which is quite impressive and very encouraging that this topic is something with broad appeal across the profession. We also looked at the stage of the career of people who have signed up, and we found a mix of academics and practitioners. The academic side, the career stages are mostly early career researchers, but not exclusively. There's About a quarter are assistant professors or lecturers, and then there's doctoral students and senior lecturers and associate professors as well. The other half includes other academic positions, as well as practitioners like chief sustainability officers, knowledge managers, co-director of sustainability initiatives, and some CEOs, and many others. So we not only have a broad interest within academia, but also outside of academia. And I think sometimes we do struggle a little bit in academia to understand just how much demand there is for our work outside of academia. And at the Ivy Sustainability Conference at Ivy Business School, where Tima is, they did this really neat thing where they invited some planners from the City of London to the conference. And I got to speak with them a little bit at lunch break, and they said that they really want to understand what's happening on the research side, but they don't have money to pay for the journal access fees. And the city doesn't budget to pay for those. So what we're seeing with this discussion is, yes, there's a lot of interest and impact within academia, but there's also that demand from the other side. Could you change the slide, please? So here I'm going to talk about answers to the question of what impact means to you. And Garima did this wonderful thing where she went through and identified some themes in these responses. So 4 of the themes that showed up were around these ideas of research, change, the real world, and community. The research theme is about a lot of what we've talked about so far today, which is how research questions, where should research questions come from? Should they be derived from real life problems, or should they come from gaps in theoretical understanding? The change theme is about whether research and other activities that we do as academics has an observable effect on how things are done. So one of the comments was about not just writing about things changing, but enacting change, but being a part of change. Some others focused on change, whether it was within organizations or whether it was in the broader level of society. So where change happens is something that people are thinking about when they think of impact. Where is the impact occurring? And also, who is affected by the impact? There's quite a bit of attention to different stakeholder groups in the responses. Academics, yes, but also policymakers, different communities, students, and other stakeholders that are important to us. And then in society, there's at the society level impact, there's a focus on these big challenges that we've talked about, like inequality, poverty, social and environmental justice. In the third theme of the real world, we've seen some of this distinction between academia and something outside of academia. It's really a mental approach to the problem that clearly divides these two worlds into separate places. And that's reflective of some of the siloing that happens in academia. But there's quite a bit of interpretation of impact that's about what happens outside of academia rather than inside of academia. There's a desire for research to have meaning outside academia. The real world is where problems exist. Research should address those problems in a meaningful way. And this is where teaching came in. Teaching is a way to affect the real world outside of academia by building students' abilities that they will use when they go out and work in the, quote, real world. And finally, the community theme captures who benefits from research. So who is the impact on? There's a concern that research projects involving stakeholders primarily take from stakeholders without giving back. There's questions about how to balance that more so that the communities we study benefit from the work instead of just the researcher. One respondent describes impact as including communities who are addressed or used as data in research projects. And some comments mention non-research impact on communities, such as our volunteer work, using our time outside of academia and research to give back to the communities we feel are important in our lives. Next slide, please. So what questions are kind of raised by these responses? We saw at least 4 questions important here. We want to question this separation between academia and the real world. What would it look like? What would impact look like if we didn't start from this assumption that these are 2 separate places? And we've talked a lot about this next one today. How does the career promotion process affect this divide? And some of you have asked in the question box what besides research counts as impact, and also how do we measure impact? So we've been talking mostly about research, but Maybe there are alternative ways to measure impact through social media engagement and engaging with other groups and stakeholders and organizations in our work. And it also raises the question of which communities do you consider your work to be benefiting, or which communities do you want to benefit? Which communities do you feel you're a part of? We're building a new community here, but we all have limited time and energy and resources to give to communities. So thinking about which communities we want to impact is also something that might be important. Next slide, please. And finally, what did everyone say about the topics that we should address going forward? So we had a few that stood out. One is, how do you build an impact scholar identity? How do you start to organize your career around this idea of impact? How do you relate to choosing the topics you work on, choosing the projects that you do if a focus is to have impact? Rewarding impact and promotion is also very important. We'll talk much more about that, of course. And related to that is, how do you publish impact-focused research? How do we think about which journals are receptive to this work? And how do we present the work in a way that matters to the academic audiences that review it, while also hoping to retain some connection to having impact on the communities we care about? And we also have talked quite a bit, although not explicitly, about science communication. How do we disseminate and promote the insights from our research? How do we connect with other stakeholders, such as journalists, as policymakers and community decision makers, in ways that so that they think of us when they want insights on a problem? If you read the Wall Street Journal, you'll see all the time economists are very adept at building these kinds of connections, and they're often the ones interviewed for topics on management. And that's fine. There are many economists who study management, but there are other experts who could be out there too. Some of you might be familiar with the Women Also Know Stuff project that is specifically about promoting female political scientists as experts on subjects to journalists. And these kinds of initiatives can be important as we think about how to increase our impact outside of academia. And that's also related to participating in public discourse and the various ways that we can do that. So I'll now hand it over to Sylvia for our concluding slide on takeaways and next steps as we move forward to build this community. Thank you.
Can I say one quick thing, Nicholas?
Of course.
So Nicholas shared the link to the article that we've created using this data. And at the end of the article is a long list of everything the 200 some of you who filled the survey shared with us. So it's thematized. So that's, I think, a great starting point for us as a community to decide what should we focus on. So if you haven't had the time, do look at that list and you'll realize how rich and sort of generative it could be.
All right. Yeah, good. Let me just switch slides. Well, we are coming to the end. Thank you so much, Tima, Andy, Garima, and Nicholas. I really feel truly overwhelmed, and I feel so motivated after listening to you and seeing and hearing all your insights. And actually, I had to step back to kind of do some tweeting in the background, and I have to agree with Andy. Andy, that's not easy to do. I really felt like this is a very specific skill. I'm not having it yet, but I hope I did a good job in providing good quotes from each of you. And yeah, I'm really excited, and you left me with a very positive note that this community is something that's truly needed, and that's something that has a great future ahead. So coming to kind of the takeaways and the next steps of this community. So first of all, as you have heard, this community is really here kind of to make you feel that you are not alone. You are not alone with your questions and your concerns about impact creation. Kind of reestablish this community for you and to kind of offer you a platform like today to kind of talk and to create solutions together, to kind of develop the skill sets together. And as I said, we're really here to kind of develop kind of impact capabilities, and we decided for ourselves that we would like to do it with what we call kind of the social, technological or technical infrastructure, really like having this community, but also providing you with resources and kind of activities that you can learn how to become an impact scholar, that we are developing this together through the development of the community. And speaking of this, we are going to provide a summary of this event as well. So it's not just we are providing the records and the chat, we're also writing up a written summary we are going to share with everyone on the call, but also everyone who could not attend today. So it will look similar to the blog post we already talked about and Nicholas elaborated on. So we will continue doing developing those kind of resources. And over the next months, we also want to continue building this community, because Garima, Nicholas and I, we are really here for a long-term commitment. We don't see this as a kind of a one-time event or something that will flatten out after 1 year. We are really here to have this as a long year commitment, but it also means that we need your help. So we really need active members who are willing to contribute, who are willing to kind of develop resources and material with us together, also maybe taking over some events and also speaking up as part of sharing your impact journeys, or also speaking up as senior scholars, really providing us their guidance and advices. So this is something we're going to work on over the next months. And we really encourage you to reach out to us to share your ideas and your insights with us. And as you see, we are planning some upcoming events. So initially we thought about kind of a social event to kind of bring the community out of the virtual space to a social space at the Academy, but we all kind of know that might not going to happen. So we will instead have a virtual coffee meeting around the Academy of Management time. So please be prepared that you're going to get an invitation from us. And the next big event will be on October 20th, around the same time, where we'll have a similar setup and, as I said, more active engagements to build the capabilities of that impact community. So overall, we thought about having 2, 3, or depending on the engagement, maybe also 4 events that we will have throughout the year. And between the different events, we will share a lot of insights with you through email or other blog posts. So we will keep you engaged. So don't think we will silent out between events. It's actually the opposite. We really want to engage with you in different ways. So having said this, before I say goodbye, I would really like to thank you, Tima and Andy. It was so insightful, as I said, to listen to you. I'm really happy that we got you as our first speakers for this event. I think you really helped us shaping the direction of this community and also motivating everyone and to see where this is going to. And it's something that's really needed, and that we're not alone as junior scholars and that you're here to help us. So thank you very much for it. I would also like to thank you, Garima and Nicholas, for really helping setting up this community. Without you, I think this would be a very boring one-woman show, and we would have not have the same outcome as we have today. I mean, we had at the peak 144 people joining us today. We started this with the idea of having 20 or 30 people, so we really exceeded our own expectations. So thank you everyone for joining us, for signing up and for supporting us in all different ways. Thank you to all members, and we hope you stay engaged, and we hope to hear from you, to hear your feedback throughout the next days and weeks. So thank you very much. Tima or Andy, if you have some last words you would like to share with us, feel free. I'm so happy for today's call and how relevant.
No, I just want to say thank you for inviting me. And this event is, to my mind, one more data point in the extent to which the institutions are changing. So thank you very much for putting it together.
And I agree with Andy entirely that this has been really an honor to be an inaugural speaker, but what you guys are doing is so important. And I think that we as a community, if we really focus on impact, we could make a huge difference in the world. So we need to come out of the cracks and be heard. So thank you for organizing this.
Thank you very much. Nicholas, Garima, do you want to share some last comments before we close the call?
Just a thank you to everyone for being here today.
Yeah, likewise. I'm just so excited to where we can go. And I hope that people just step up and take leadership on these various topics so that we keep the momentum going. So thank you, everyone.